Hi friends, my name is Cindy and I am one of the children's librarians at Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine, and today we're going to be reading our third part of Ivy by Katherine Coville, and we were finishing chapter 6. Are you ready? Let's begin. Mistress Peevish backed away. "This is all your fault. I told you magical creatures were nothing but trouble. And now look what's happened. The mayor will have something to say about this." The buzzing began around her head again, and she waved her arms in the air. "Ouch!" she howled. "Poofy," she pleaded. Come, Poofy, it's time for your bath. Ouch!" Poof slowly crept out from under the griffin's wing and looked at Mistress Peevish. He turned and looked at Cedric. Then he dove back under the griffin's wing. The mayor's wife stamped one foot and then the other. Then she tried to stamp both feet at the same time and ended up hopping up and down, still waving her arms in the air. "I can't stand this for another minute," she spluttered. "I'm going home, but don't think this is the end of it. I'll be back tomorrow with help." "Ouch! There are only 2 days left. 2 days! And if you don't fix this mess and get rid of that horrible beast, ouch, someone will do it for you. Just wait and see." And with that, the proud and haughty Mistress Peevish turned and ran away. Chapter 7, a little to the left. And there's a picture of a fairy, very tiny, right there. Ivy and Grandmother watched the mayor's wife run up the road. "She sure is mad," said Ivy. "She is a woman of deep feelings," agreed Grandmother. "I guess this means we have to go back to work," said Ivy with a heavy sigh. "Yes, there is much to do and very little time," said Grandmother, "but we'll do our best, won't we?" "Yes, Grandmother, but what about Cedric?" asked Ivy. "The mayor's wife doesn't like him very much." "Nonsense," answered Grandmother. "They just need to get to know each other better. It will all work out." Throughout the afternoon, Ivy and Grandmother worked away. The pixies were not very helpful, but they kept Ivy company and made her laugh, tickling her and doing acrobatics in mid-air. Ivy picked up the plants that the griffin had knocked down the night before. She saved the ones Grandmother could use and sorted them into separate piles. Grandmother spent the afternoon cooking up potions for the uprooted plants. Sometimes she called Ivy in to help with the measuring. Cedric wove the leftover plants into his nest. He built the sides so high that Poof was completely hidden. Then Ivy asked him to help straighten up the sunflowers. She stood back and directed him while he tilted each plant until it looked just right, and she patted more soil around the roots to hold them in place. They worked late into the afternoon. Finally, the mess from the griffin's crash landing was cleaned up, except for a lot of loose feathers. There was a long bare patch in the garden where the plants used to be, but that couldn't be helped. Grandmother nodded and said their work was done. "Now, Cedric," said Grandmother, "we must think of a way to improve your landings. We can't have you crashing every time you come back down to earth." "No crashing," said the griffin. "No more crashing. Good, very good." "How is your stump, Cedric?" asked Ivy thoughtfully. "I mean, where the crocodile got you. Does it still pain you?" "Not so bad, not so very bad. It will do," answered Cedric. "After the croc got Cedric, or maybe it was an octopus, there was a good child, brave child, who found Cedric, took care of Cedric, brought Cedric food. Rolfie it was. Good child, brave child." "Then what happened?" coaxed Ivy. Cedric looked to the right, then to the left, and then down at his front feet. Ivy thought he wasn't going to answer her, but then she heard him say softly, "Then Cedric tried to fly. It was crashing into this, crashing into that, dirt flying, things broken, things flattened. So much trouble, too much trouble. That's what villagers said. Many villagers, angry villagers. 'Get out,' they said. Then goodbye home, goodbye Rolf, goodbye." Ivy stroked the griffin's back where the feathers met the fur. She thought she detected a single tear in Cedric's eye, and it matched the one in her own and the one in Grandmother's. Then Ivy thought of something and brightened. "But just think," she said, "if they hadn't sent you away, you would never have found us." "Oh, yes," cried the Griffin, perking up, "and finding Poof. Now, if only Cedric could stop crash landing." "Then let's get right to work," said Grandmother, with her hands on her hips. "But how?" asked Cedric worriedly. "You must show me how you land," said Grandmother. "Perhaps if I watch closely, I can see what the problem is." "Oh, dear," fussed the Griffin. "More crashing. Oh, dear, oh, dear." "You must be brave, Cedric," said Grandmother. "It's the only way." "But I guard the Poof," said the Griffin. "It's all right," said Ivy. "I'll watch over him for you. Here, Poof." Poof jumped out of the nest and ran straight to Ivy. The Griffin did not object, so Ivy picked up Poof and followed Grandmother around the house to the road in front. The Griffin hopped reluctantly along behind them, moaning softly. "This will make a good place to land," said Grandmother. "Do you think you can aim for the road?" "Aim is not so good anymore. Not good at all. Balance is off," replied the Griffin, shaking his head sadly. "Well then, we shall have to work on that too," declared Grandmother. "I shall stand on a spot in the road, and when you are ready to land, keep your eyes on me. I'll point if you need to go left or right." "Oh dear," moaned the Griffin. "Not good. Not such a good idea. But Cedric will try." Brave Griffin, mighty Griffin. And here's a picture of Ivy and Grandmother watching him fly. Cedric opened his wings and took off into the sky. He circled above them while Grandmother stood in the middle of the road. Ivy and Poof stood on the front steps to watch as the Griffin swooped down, aiming shakily for the road. "Oh dear," wailed Cedric as the road got closer. His legs were just a few feet from the ground when panic overtook him. He tried to lift up again, but he was going too fast. Cedric's hind foot smacked awkwardly on the ground, and the rest of him just kept going end over end until he was a rolling ball of feathers, fur, and flapping wings, heading straight for Grandmother. But Grandmother stood firm. "A little to the left," she called, pointing away from the garden. "To the left! To the left!" Ivy shouted from the steps, while Poof yapped excitedly. "Oh, no!" cried the Griffin as he tumbled to the right. Oh dear, whoops!" he squawked, mowing down yet another row of plants and crashing up against the cottage. Chapter 8. Golden. "Oh, ouch," said the Griffin. "Oh dear, so sorry, so terribly sorry. Bad Griffin has done it again." Poof ran over to the Griffin and licked his face. Ivy rushed after him. "Talk to me, Cedric. Are you all right?" "Oh yes, oh dear, maybe so." He choked and tried to sort himself out as the dust began to settle. "Don't you worry about this," said Grandmother. "This was my fault. You did beautifully. You only lost your nerve a bit at the end is all, but we can work on that. Now dust yourself off and we'll try it again." "Must do it again, must we?" moaned Cedric. "Yes," answered Grandmother, "we must. This time I want you to glide down slowly and easily, just as if you were coming to rest in a nice, soft nest." "But I will crash because of only having 3 legs." "No, you won't," Ivy reassured him. "Just imagine you're an eagle. An eagle lands on only 2 legs. You have 1 extra." "Extra?" said the Griffin hopefully. "Why, yes," Grandmother said to Ivy. "That's a fine idea." Then she turned to Cedric and stroked his wings, saying, "You are part eagle yourself. When the ground starts getting close, I want you to look at me and think like an eagle. Can you do that?" "Think like an eagle," repeated the Griffin. "Must practice." "Bark!" "Yes, Cedric dear," said Grandmother. "Now, up you go. Let's begin again." All through the evening, the Griffin practiced landing like an eagle. The first 2 tries went badly, but at least he managed to miss the garden. By the 3rd try, a crowd had begun to gather. Jacob the baker and his wife and Peter stood on their front steps, watching with their arms folded and angry looks on their faces. Bess, the candle maker, was watching too, from a safe distance. And so were James the shoemaker and his daughters. They all watched as the Griffin went up into the air. They all watched as he came back down. They all shook their heads as he scrambled to land in a cloud of dust. Each time the dust settled, Cedric would shake himself off and try again. Ivy and Grandmother cheered him on. On the 6th try, the Griffin thought so hard about being an eagle that he nearly forgot to panic. Things went much better after that. On his 7th and 8th tries, he approached the ground more slowly, and on his 9th try, he hardly skidded at all, but he was tired and discouraged. "Oh, ouch," moaned the Griffin, covering his head with one wing. "Maybe enough tries for today." "But Cedric," cried Ivy, "you can't give up now. You're so close. Won't you please try one more time, please?" Cedric sighed heavily and sighed again. Then he shook the dust from his feathers and said, "Will do my best." He leaped into the air and began to circle. Ivy held Poof tightly as Cedric began to spiral downward. She watched the Griffin line up with the lane and glide in slowly, lower and lower. Ivy held her breath as his front eagle claws reached for the ground. He hovered there for a moment, his wings flapping to hold him upright, then touched down his rear lion foot and found his balance right in front of Grandmother. Cedric folded his wings gracefully as a look of surprise and joy overcame him. "Woohoo!" Ivy cheered. "Woohoo!" Cedric cried. Ivy clapped her hands and jumped up and down. Cedric took a bow. "Good Griffin, clever Griffin," he said. "Yes," agreed Ivy, "graceful Griffin too." "Well done," said Grandmother, stroking his broad back. Everyone came closer, staring at the Griffin. Only Jacob was still looking around for some trouble. "Aha!" he said. "Look at that! Now he's done it." "Done what?" asked Ivy. "There," he replied, pointing to Grandmother's house. The whole cottage was covered with a thick coating of dirt. The clouds of dust the Griffin had raised with his landings had settled over everything. The roof was covered with dust. The walls were covered with dust. The windows were covered with dust. "And look!" yelled Peter, pointing at the garden. Every leaf and flower in the garden was covered with dust, too. The villagers gasped in horror. The shoemaker's children, Edwina and Marta, snickered. "Messy, messy, messy," they chanted just loudly enough for Ivy to hear. Ivy looked away and pretended she hadn't heard them, but her throat tightened up. Why did they have to be so mean? She tried to think of something to say back to them, but as she watched Grandmother smiling and talking softly to the angry villagers, she knew Grandmother would want her to do the same. Ivy gazed at the dust-covered cottage and garden. The sun was setting, and the orange light on the dust made everything look golden. "Look at that," said Ivy, smiling. "We have a cottage made of gold and a garden of golden flowers. I think it's pretty." "It's just dirt," said Bess the candlemaker. "You'll never be able to sweep all that up. Never. And the new queen is coming in 2 days. Grandmother shook the dust from a few leaves while Ivy blew dirt from a flower. It was clear it would take a long time to clean up. Again. "Perhaps it will rain," said Grandmother brightly. "You never know." And here is the picture. "I know that magical critters are nothing but trouble," announced James the shoemaker, "and this just proves it. He's got to go." "Oh dear," said Cedric. "Oh dear, oh dear." The big Griffin got behind Ivy and ducked his head, trying to make himself very small and hoping no one would notice him. "The Griffin's home is with us for as long as he needs one," answered Grandmother firmly. "But don't you worry about the Queen. I'm sure it will all work out." James the shoemaker had just opened his mouth to speak when something began buzzing around his head. He swatted it. "You shouldn't do that," cautioned Ivy. The shoemaker paid no attention. He just kept on swatting. "Ow!" he hollered. "Something pinched me." Soon there was buzzing around the heads of all the neighbors. They began to slap at the air. Before long, all of them were shouting, "Ow!" and "Ouch!" Some began running away. "Just you wait," threatened Jacob the baker. "I've been to see Mayor Peevish. He's coming here tomorrow with the whole town council. He'll fix you." Then Jacob and his family raced home. The last of the daylight was fading. "My," said Grandmother, "what a busy day this has been. And tomorrow we shall have to be up early to get ready for our visitors. Imagine, the mayor and the whole town council coming to call. Perhaps we should invite them in for tea." Grandmother looked over the blanket of dust and at the damage done to the garden. She yawned tiredly. "This," she said, "will have to be continued in the morning. What we all need first is a good night's sleep." And that is the end of chapter 8, and we will read more tomorrow. I hope that you have enjoyed the third reading of Ivy by Katherine Coville. My name is Cindy, and I am one of the children's librarians at Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine, and I will hope to see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye, friends.